The void above the shrine world of Cypramundi split open like torn flesh. The stars themselves seemed to bleed as a rift shimmered across the heavens, a wound in reality that pulsed with colors no mortal eye was meant to endure. Pilgrims bowed in terror on the cathedral steps, chanting litanies of protection as the bells tolled in warning. The air thickened with ozone and the smell of burning incense carried from the processional lines, but the prayers did nothing to quiet the roaring in the sky. Something was falling. Through the sundered veil streaked a figure of crimson and gold wrapped in fire, trailing contrails of warp light that hissed as they scorched the upper atmosphere. The silhouette was not of any drop pod, not of any imperial craft, but of a man, armored, gleaming, and burning as though the void itself had tried to consume him. The priests and soldiers who witnessed the descent screamed in half ecstasy, half dread, proclaiming it as a miracle or a curse. To the ecclesiarchy such omens were never neutral. They were signs of judgment. The figure plummeted with unstoppable velocity, crashing into the outer wastes beyond the hive city's walls. Dust and ash plumed into the air, a thunderclap rolling across the plains that shattered stained glass windows for miles. The faithful who dared to approach found the crater smoldering, its edges warped like molten iron. At its heart lay a man unlike any they had ever seen. He was encased in armor that shone even beneath layers of ash, a red so deep it gleamed like blood in firelight, traced with veins of gold. The design was unlike the hallowed power armor of the Adeptus Astartes, and yet it spoke of equal majesty. Sleek where the Imperium favored brutalism, elegant where the Mechanicus cherished function, it radiated intent and genius. His helmeted faceplate was that of a blank mask with glowing eyes, alien yet regal. The pilgrims fell to their knees, some crying out that the Omnissiah had descended in the flesh, others whispering that a daemon prince had fallen among them. The confusion bred only fear. The Arbites arrived in moments, bolters trained, their augurs scanning for warp taint, yet no corruption was found. The man stirred. His armored gauntlets clawed against the ash as he struggled to rise, his breathing harsh and ragged inside the helm. "Where am I?" The voice came from within the mask, distorted yet unmistakably human. None dared answer. The Arbites closed in, chains of binding ready, but even as they advanced the air hummed with power. The figure raised one hand, and a pulse of energy burst forth, a repulsor blast that sent dust spiraling and forced the guards back on their heels. The pilgrims wailed, crossing themselves with feverish desperation. The stranger finally stood, his armor scarred from re-entry but not broken. He looked to the horizon where Gothic spires rose like spears of stone and smoke. Vast cathedrals dominated the skyline, draped in banners depicting a robed giant with a burning halo, the god-emperor of mankind. At the sight, his head tilted, as though measuring the impossible scale of faith around him. The Arbites' captain shouted for containment, invoking imperial authority, but before his words could harden into violence, the ground trembled. Servo engines whined, vox horns crackled, and a cohort of robed figures descended into the crater, the tech priests of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Their robes of crimson brushed the ash, mechadendrites writhed like steel serpents, and their eyes glowed with the cold light of augmetics. One stepped forward, vox grill hissing, designation unknown, armor pattern unidentified, energy readings anomaly. "Record this, brethren. We may gaze upon a fragment of the dark age of technology." The words struck the crowd like thunder. Even the Arbites faltered, for to speak of the dark age was to whisper of mankind's lost golden era, a time of miracles long buried in ruin. The pilgrims prostrated themselves. The tech priests advanced with reverence and fear, murmuring Binharic prayers as they scanned the fallen warrior. The figure, confused, raised his faceplate to the burning sky, then lowered it to the alien priests. "I'm not sure what happened," he muttered, almost to himself. "The rift. Jarvis, are you—" He stopped. There was only silence in his helm, no AI voice to answer, no familiar system to guide him. His world, his tools, his allies gone. Only this nightmare cathedral world remained. The Mechanicus leader extended a mechadendrite. "You will come with us. The Omnissiah has brought you here for judgment and for purpose. Resist, and you will be unmade." The armored man regarded them in silence. He did not understand their words, not yet, but he understood posture, tone, and the threat of weapons. His stance shifted slightly, defensive, weary but unbroken. The pilgrims chanted louder, voices rising into a frenzy. A sign of the Omnissiah. The man of iron walks again. That phrase, man of iron, seemed to ripple through the tech priests like static. Their eyes widened, their binary prayers grew harsher, as though recalling forbidden data. The Arbites drew closer, fingers tense upon their triggers. The sky still bled behind them, the rift refusing to close, its wound spilling faint whispers that made the air colder. In those whispers the stranger felt something gaze back at him, vast and hungry. He shivered, though his armor was warm. For a moment all forces stood on the brink, priests in worship, guards in fear, and one man in strange armor staring into a world he did not know. And then, as if mocking the fragile calm, the rift above cracked wider, spilling more light into the world. Something else was coming through. They brought him in chains of sanctified steel, though the chains bent and warped under the strain of his armored strength. The Arbites marched alongside, bolters loaded, their visors glinting with suspicion. Ahead strode the tech priests of Mars, their red robes dragging like bloody banners, their mechadendrites whispering prayers into the air as if the very presence of this armored stranger demanded endless liturgy. The shrine world's orbital docks had been repurposed as a sanctum for transport. He was led into the cavernous interior of a Mechanicus lander, its walls covered in bronze reliquaries, its vox-casters chanting Binharic codes like hymns. The smell of machine oil mixed with incense filled his lungs with every breath. He remained silent, his mind racing, but outwardly he appeared calm, measured, watchful. When the ship lifted from the scorched plains and climbed into the blackness of space, he looked back through a porthole. The rift still yawned wide in the void, but now it flickered as though uncertain, gnawing at reality itself. The sight twisted his stomach. That thing dropped me here. But why? He had known many battles in his life, many crises, many storms of chaos and destruction, yet this was different. There was no familiar pattern, no known science to anchor him. It was as though he had stepped into a realm where reason was only tolerated, not respected. The journey to Mars took weeks, though within the ship time felt frozen. Every day the tech priests scanned him, dissecting his armor with auger beams and holy canticles. Their muttering unsettled him, half ritual, half diagnosis. They did not ask his name. They called him relic, or artifact, or most often man of iron. That phrase returned again and again, spoken with awe, dread, and anger. It reminded him of myths whispered in half-lit laboratories, of man's ancient nightmares about their own creations. Yet here, the words were heavy with dogma. He filed it away, a puzzle for later. When finally the ship descended onto Mars, he was struck breathless, not by fear, but by sheer scale. The entire planet burned red with fire and industry. The sky was black with ash. Forged spires rose like mountains of steel, their heights crowned in lightning. Oceans of molten metal poured into rivers that glowed across the surface. Every horizon was a storm of machines. They led him through colossal gates into the heart of a forged temple, where the air trembled with the sound of eternal hammers and the chanting of billions. Here, the priests of the cult Mechanicus encircled him, a choir of flesh and steel, their faces stripped of humanity and replaced by masks of devotion. The leader, a magos whose body was little more than a towering frame of pistons and bronze, loomed before him. Its voice rasped through vox grills. Identify, designation, origin, function. The man in the armor hesitated. His helmet retracted with a smooth hiss, and for the first time his human face was revealed beneath the alien light. Eyes dark, beard unshaven, features marked with exhaustion but also with iron determination. He spoke, voice firm though tinged with disbelief. "My name is Tony Stark. I'm not from here." The chamber echoed with binary shrieks, mechadendrites snapping like whips. The magos tilted its head, lenses zooming. "Tony Stark. No record, no index, not within the archives of man. Yet your warplate bears the signature of the ancients. You are forbidden knowledge made flesh." Tony squared his shoulders. "It's not forbidden where I come from. It's just engineering." The magos released a burst of static that sounded almost like laughter. Blasphemy or revelation? We shall see. For days he was interrogated. Though the priests did not understand his words as much as they tried to catalogue them, he told them of Earth, of a different world, of wars and struggles, of invention and redemption. They dismissed his confessions as metaphors, seeing only fragments of the Dark Age resurrected. Still, Stark observed as much as he spoke. He saw how the Mechanicus clung to faith like shackles, how knowledge was locked away behind rituals, how machines were worshipped instead of studied. They were brilliant and broken in equal measure. Their genius was bound in fear. One night, left alone in his sanctified cell, Stark stared at the massive forge engines beyond the barred window. He listened to the endless hymns, the unceasing clangor of hammers, and he felt both awe and despair. "This place," he whispered to himself, "it's a graveyard of ideas. They've buried reason under incense and prayer. He clenched his fists. His armor lay deactivated beside him, stripped of its arc reactor core. Yet even without its power, he could feel the potential in the air, the raw abundance of machinery waiting to be unleashed. If I can understand their rules, I can change them. I can build something here, something better. The door hissed open. A smaller priest entered, augmetic eyes glowing with curiosity rather than malice. It spoke softly in Binharic, then shifted into Low Gothic. You are not like the man of iron spoken in our archives. They were machines without soul, who turned upon their makers. Yet you are flesh, you are paradox. Tony studied him carefully. Paradox or not, I can help. You want to win your wars, you want to build weapons that last. Let me work. The priest hesitated, its mechadendrites twitching nervously. The Magos forbids. To design without right is heresy. Tony leaned forward, eyes intense. Then maybe it's time someone broke the rules. The words hung in the air, dangerous as a blade. The priest's lenses flickered, caught between awe and terror. Outside, the forges roared on, endless and blind, while in the silence of the cell a seed had been planted, a thought that could ignite a revolution or burn an empire. The Forge Temple was a place where logic had been entombed beneath ritual. Every corridor of Mars trembled with the chants of machine priests, the smell of burning incense thick enough to coat the lungs, candles guttered beside plasma conduits, vast cathedral factories echoed with litanies that praised the Omnissiah with every hammer strike. To Tony Stark it was both inspiring and horrifying, a civilization built on the bones of science, but paralyzed by worship. He was escorted daily into the amphitheater of inquiry, where robed tech priests and adepts debated his very existence. Their mechadendrites twitched and clattered like restless serpents, recording his words, dissecting his armor, and quoting scripture to justify their fear. They circled him like carrion birds. The relic speaks blasphemy, one rasped. He denies the machine god. He is knowledge incarnate, countered another. To discard him is to discard the Omnissiah's will. Stark sat upon the cold slab they had chained him to, wrists bound in manacles that hummed with suppressive energy. His eyes moved from one speaker to the next, his jaw tightening. He had dealt with boardrooms filled with power-hungry executives, senators, generals. He recognized the same hunger here, cloaked in piety. "You're all so scared," he said finally, his voice sharp enough to cut through the drone of canticles. "You worship machines, but you're terrified of what they might become. You've locked yourselves in cages built out of prayers and regulations. That's not faith, that's fear wearing robes." A susurrus of outrage hissed through the chamber. Several priests spat bursts of static. The presiding Magos raised a piston arm to silence them. Its vox grill crackled with restrained fury. "You dare judge us, Outlander? The Omnissiah guides every circuit, every spark, every function. To deviate from the liturgy is heresy. It was deviation that birthed the men of iron, who enslaved humanity in the ancient days. It was faith that preserved us through the long night." Tony's gaze didn't waver. "Faith didn't preserve you. People did. People who built, who fought, who bled. You talk about fear of machines, but I see a different kind of fear. You're terrified of your own potential. That's worse than any machine rebellion." The Magos leaned close, lenses glowing like suns. "You speak of potential as though it were unchained, but potential without restraint leads to ruin. Knowledge must be bound in right or it devours the soul." For a moment Stark almost laughed. It was absurd, this entire theater of superstition, but he caught himself. The weight of this place was too heavy, too absolute. This wasn't a boardroom he could charm or outwit. This was an empire of faith. That night, alone again in his sanctum cell, Stark pressed his palms to the cold stone floor. He thought of the cathedrals outside, their spires scraping the blood-red sky. He thought of the people he had glimpsed in the labor pits, serfs breaking their backs to feed the forges, their faces gaunt with devotion. He thought of the statues of the God Emperor, colossal and unyielding, carved into every horizon. How do you fight a world where faith is heavier than gravity? He stared at his armor, stripped of its heart, lying inert like a corpse. The arc reactor that once gave it life had been confiscated, hidden in reliquaries as though it were a relic of sainthood. Without it, the suit was nothing but empty metal. Yet the fire inside him refused to die. "If I can't fight their faith, I'll bend it. If I can't break the chains, I'll design a key." The next day he was brought again before the conclave. Instead of defiance, he sat in silence, watching, listening. He allowed them to argue over him as though he were an artifact rather than a man. Slowly he began to learn their language, not just the words but the rhythm of their belief. He understood how they saw the universe, as a place too vast, too hostile, too cursed to survive without worship. Their rituals weren't just superstition, they were armor for the soul. When finally they demanded he speak, he rose to his feet, chains rattling. His voice carried a strange weight now, quieter but sharper. "You want to call me a man of iron? Fine, but look closer. I'm flesh, I'm blood, I'm fallible. I'm not your past come back to haunt you. I'm your future, standing right in front of you. You can burn me as heresy, or you can use what I know to build something greater than your fear." The chamber fell into uneasy silence. Some priests averted their eyes, troubled by the clarity of his words. Others hissed binary curses. The Magos remained unmoving, like a statue carved of steel. At length it spoke. "You speak as though destiny were yours to command. Yet here, destiny belongs to the Emperor alone. Still, your words carry weight, perhaps too much weight." The congregation broke into murmurs. For the first time, Tony felt he had shaken the foundations of their certainty, even if only slightly. Later, as he was escorted back to his chamber, the smaller priest he had spoken to before leaned close, whispering through its vox, "You plant dangerous seeds, Outlander, seeds that may grow into blades. Be wary." Tony glanced sideways at him. "I've been planting dangerous seeds my whole life. Question is, do you want to see what grows?" The priest gave no reply. The door sealed shut, leaving Stark alone once more. He sat in the dim red glow of the forge lights, chains digging into his wrists, mind turning like a restless engine. For all their resistance, for all their faith, he had glimpsed a crack in their armor, and through that crack he intended to build. Yet outside his cell, unseen, the whispers of the warp stirred. His defiance had not only shaken men of faith, it had drawn the gaze of darker things. The forged cities of Mars never slept. Their horizons glowed with rivers of molten metal, and the thunder of engines that had roared for 10,000 years. From his cell, Tony Stark gazed at the endless sprawl of Manufactoria, where factory temples stretched like mountains of steel, each crowned with lightning. The sight was intoxicating, an entire planet devoted not to politics or greed, but to creation, and yet creation here was bound by chains of superstition. He dreamed of breaking those chains. Each night, when sleep did come, visions consumed him, colossal war machines striding across battlefields of ash, their steps shaking the bones of the earth. He saw titans, imperial god engines marching with the sound of thunder, banners trailing, weapons glowing with the fire of suns. He saw them shatter cities, silence armies, and crush daemons beneath their feet. But his dream was different, where their titans were sacred relics, trapped in rituals older than memory. His vision was of something new, sleeker, smarter, alive in a way no machine had been for millennia. He whispered to himself in the dark, voice rough, not a relic, not a prayer, a titan built to think, to adapt, to survive. The Mechanicus watched him, though they did not understand what flickered behind his eyes. They thought him broken, but Stark's mind was never still. With every glimpse of the forges, with every chant he overheard, he built a blueprint inside his head, piecing together fragments of imperial technology with the principles of his own lost world. His suit had been stripped of power, his reactor sealed away, but his imagination was untouchable. The smaller priest, Cyrex 44, the one who had shown curiosity instead of condemnation, brought him nutrient rations one evening. The two had developed a cautious understanding, a rhythm of words traded in the shadows where the Magos gaze was weakest. "You dream loudly, Outlander," Cyrex said, its vox a low murmur. "You speak of building as though the universe were not already built." Tony gave a faint smile. "The universe is never finished. It's a draft that demands revision. You worship titans as gods, but what if one could be improved? What if one could be more than ritual?" The priest stiffened, mechadendrites curling back as if recoiling from blasphemy. To alter a titan is heresy beyond measure. They are embodiments of the Omnissiah's will. They walk only by prayer and by sacrifice, and by physics. Stark said dryly, "You can chant until your voice breaks, but it's gears and energy that move them. I've seen gods bleed. Machines don't need worship, they need innovation." Cyrex hesitated, lenses shifting as though the words had cracked something deep within. "Innovation breeds heresy. Heresy breeds death." Yet, its voice softened to static. "Your words gnaw at reason." Tony leaned forward, his tone low, persuasive. "Look out there. Do you see what your forges could become if you stopped shackling them with fear? I don't want to destroy your faith, but what if faith could coexist with progress? What if you could build something the Omnissiah himself would envy?" That night, Stark dreamed again. He walked within a colossal hangar of steel, where scaffolds climbed higher than mountains. At the center stood his vision, a titan of immense scale. its armor glowing with reactor light, its frame woven from alloys stronger than anything he had known, its weapons humming with restrained fury. It bore the iconography of the Imperium, yes, but it also carried his mark: streamlined design, hidden systems, a fusion of genius and war. It did not feel like a weapon alone, it felt alive. He awoke in a cold sweat, the dream clinging like fire. The room was silent save for the endless thrum of the forges outside. He pressed a hand to his forehead. It's possible. It has to be. Over the next weeks he whispered his ideas to Cyrex in stolen moments. He spoke of reactors that did not bleed away half their power to inefficiency, of armor that absorbed energy instead of cracking beneath it, of weapons that adjusted on the fly rather than relying on centuries-old calibrations. Cyrex listened, trembling, torn between awe and terror. One evening as the forge horns bellowed across the city, Cyrex asked, "Why do you risk death for this dream? You could remain silent, survive in chains, and perhaps even be forgotten." Tony's reply was immediate, his eyes burning with conviction. Because survival without building is nothing. I've seen worlds collapse under their own stagnation. I won't watch it happen again. If I'm trapped here, I'm going to change it, one way or another. The words struck the priest like a hammer. For the first time Cyrex knelt, not in worship but in something close to allegiance. If the Omnissiah wills it, then I will help. Far above them, storms of plasma danced across the Martian sky. Warp light shimmered faintly on the horizon, unseen by most but felt by all. The dreams Tony carried were no longer his alone. They were seeds taking root in forbidden soil, and somewhere in the endless data vaults of Mars, the machine spirits stirred uneasily, as though something vast had shifted in the balance. The dream of a Titan had been born, but the warp whispered in reply, hungry to claim it. The first whispers reached Terra before Stark even knew he was being watched. Word carried by Void Ship and Astropath filtered through the paranoid networks of the Imperium. Mars was harboring an anomaly, a figure of flesh clad in warplate beyond classification, a man of iron who spoke as though science could rival scripture. To the Inquisition, such whispers were never ignored. When the Inquisitor arrived, there were no horns to announce her, no banners of warning. She came cloaked in silence, as was her kind. Her vessel descended upon the red world like a shard of night. In her seal was the authority of the God Emperor himself. In her gaze was the promise of judgment. Inquisitor Vera stepped from her ship, clad in black carapace armor, etched with gold sigils of the Aquila, her face hidden beneath a hood and augmetic mask. She was not tall, but her presence seemed to bend the air around her. The Martian priests bowed as one, mechadendrites twitching in ritual obeisance, though unease radiated through their movements. The arrival of the Inquisition was never a blessing. It was a sentence waiting to be spoken. She was led through the forge halls, her retinue following like shadows, acolytes, scribes, and a silent assassin draped in obsidian. Her steps rang cold against the iron floors. The air was thick with incense smoke and the perpetual hum of engines. She asked no questions until she reached the chamber where Tony Stark was held. The Magos of Mars bowed, Voxgrill hissing reverently. "Inquisitor Vera, we present the anomaly, the man of iron." The hood tilted, and her masked eyes fell upon him. Stark sat chained upon the slab, though he no longer looked like a prisoner. His posture was steady, his head high, his eyes sharp with quiet defiance. The chains were mere ceremony. If he chose he could break them, but he knew the cost of doing so. He studied the figure before him, and saw not a priest nor a soldier, but something colder, something hungrier. "So," she said at last, her voice carrying the weight of centuries of lore and terror, "the forges of Mars whisper true. A man has fallen from the sky, armored in forbidden design, bearing words that stir the faithful into unrest." "Funny," Stark replied evenly. "Back where I'm from, I was considered one of the good guys." Her head tilted slightly. "Where you are from no longer matters. You stand in the realm of the Emperor. All else is dust." The Magos interjected, its binary litanies rising with agitation. "He is no ordinary wanderer, Inquisitor. He is knowledge incarnate, a vessel of innovation. He speaks of building machines beyond our right, of improving the Titan legions." At this, Vera's gaze sharpened. She stepped closer to Stark, her presence suffocating. "You dare speak of Titans, sacred god engines, embodiments of the Omnissiah's will. To tamper with them is blasphemy beyond measure." Tony met her stare without flinching. "Blasphemy, I call it progress. Your Titans are powerful, yes, but they're relics held together by superstition and tape. I could design something faster, stronger, more efficient, something that might save lives instead of wasting them." The silence that followed was colder than steel. Even the air recyclers seemed to hesitate. Vera's masked face drew close enough that he could see the faint glow of augmetic eyes beneath. You speak of salvation, Outlander, but this galaxy does not know salvation. It knows only survival, and survival demands obedience. You think to build a god engine outside the Emperor's will. That is not salvation, that is heresy that will doom billions. Stark leaned forward against the chains, his voice low but cutting. Maybe the problem isn't the heresy. Maybe the problem is that you've built your entire world on fear of it. The assassin's hand twitched toward his blade. The priests hissed static, but Vera raised a hand, halting them. For the first time she considered. There was danger in this man, more than in any daemon or mutant. Daemons destroyed the body, heresy destroyed the soul, and this one had the charisma of a prophet cloaked in iron. If left unchecked, his words could spread like fire. Yet she could not deny what she had seen in the Magos's reports, the schematics whispered in secret, the calculations that no priest had been able to refute. His ideas were not madness, they were terrifyingly sound. She turned to the Magos. You will not allow this anomaly to act unchecked. Guard him, study him, but should he step beyond your control, I will burn him from existence and scatter his ashes into the void. The Magos bowed deeply, but its mechadendrites trembled. It had begun to believe Stark's words, and belief was more dangerous than defiance. As Vera left the chamber, her final words echoed like a curse. The Imperium has no need for men of iron. We have faith, and faith alone endures. When the doors closed, Stark exhaled slowly. For all his bravado, her presence had chilled him to the bone. He knew the type in forces of systems so rigid they would rather burn the galaxy than change a single law. But he also knew this: if the Inquisition feared his ideas, then those ideas had power. That night, as he lay beneath the hum of the forge lights, the vision returned. He saw the Titan again, its silhouette towering against the void, its reactor burning like a sun. But this time, in the dream, he was not alone. Shadows moved in the corners, watchers waiting, hungering. The warp was listening. He awoke drenched in sweat, the Inquisitor's words still echoing in his ears. Faith alone endures. But in his heart he whispered a defiant reply. So does innovation. The forge halls of Mars were endless, stretching into cavernous darkness, lit only by the glow of molten rivers and the glare of plasma forges. Titans slept in their cradles, colossal shapes swathed in incense smoke and prayers, their machine spirits lulled into uneasy slumber by constant hymns. Tony Stark walked among these temples of steel under guard, his chains loosened but never removed. Every step he took, every glance he stole at the sacred machines was observed by dozens of mechadendrites and glowing augmetic eyes. Yet for all the scrutiny, doubt had begun to stir among the priests. Doubt was a sin here, but it was also a seed, and Stark had a way of planting seeds. He began with questions so simple that the priests found themselves unable to dismiss them. Why did Titans require 100 prayers before activation when a single key sequence might suffice? Why were reactor losses tolerated as divine will when basic engineering showed the flaws could be corrected? Why must every repair take days of ritual when streamlined processes could achieve the same in hours? To the faithful, the questions were dangerous. To the curious, they were irresistible. Cyrex 44 had become his quiet ally, slipping him fragments of schematics and data slates under the guise of routine maintenance. The information was never complete, always shrouded in code, fragmented by the labyrinthine rites of secrecy, but it was enough. Stark's mind filled the gaps with ruthless efficiency. In the dim solitude of his sanctum, he sketched designs upon the dust with a piece of scorched metal, lines and curves that glowed like destiny in the forge light. He was building a Titan, not with tools, not with steel, but in the forge of imagination. The visions grew stronger. At night, when exhaustion dragged him into uneasy sleep, he dreamed of striding war machines that bore his mark. Their frames were slimmer, more efficient, their weapons humming with adaptive power. He saw them cutting through the armies of the archenemy, their steps defying daemons, their armor gleaming with light that no corruption could consume. But the dreams were not his alone. Shadows whispered in the dreamscape, voices slithering from beyond. Innovator, creator, builder of gods, lend us your mind, and we shall give you eternity. He would wake trembling, sweat soaking his skin beneath the cold stone air of his chamber. The warp was aware of him. It hungered for what he intended to build, and that terrified him more than the Inquisitor's gaze ever could. Still, the work continued. One evening, Cyrex confronted him. The smaller priest's lenses glowed dimly as it laid a fragment of Titan schematics upon the floor. Its mechadendrites twitched with unease. You should not have this, Cyrex whispered. Already others suspect. They whisper of heresy, of corruption. The Inquisitor's eye grows sharp. If she discovers, then I'll be ash. Stark cut in, his voice steady. But if I don't try, if I sit in chains and do nothing, then I've already lost. You think I don't hear it? The cracks in your faith, the questions you're too afraid to speak. You know this system is broken. The priest faltered, its vox stuttering. Faith preserves. Without it, we are nothing. Tony leaned forward, his eyes burning in the forge light. No, without innovation you are nothing. Faith alone keeps you clinging to survival while the universe tears you apart. But what if faith and innovation could stand together? What if I build something so powerful that even your emperor himself would call it blessed? The words struck like a hammer blow. Cyrex shuddered, torn between devotion and longing. Finally it whispered, if I aid you I betray everything I was built to serve. Tony's reply was soft, almost weary. Then maybe you're serving something that's been broken all along. From that night on, Cyrex aided him more boldly. Fragments of reactor blueprints, weapon calibration rights, even coded logs of Titan awakenings, all found their way into Stark's hands. Piece by piece his vision grew sharper, but so too did suspicion. The Magos noticed the way certain priests lingered near Stark's chamber, the way whispers spread through the forge halls like sparks in dry tinder. The Inquisitor returned often, her mask unreadable, her questions precise. She pressed her palm to the chains that bound him and asked, "Do you dream, Outlander?" He looked her in the eye and lied. No, but the truth was that the dreams grew darker. In one he saw his Titan striding into battle, its reactor blazing, but its banners bore not the Aquila but symbols of writhing chaos. Its weapons screamed with voices not of machine spirits but of daemons. And he was inside, bound to the throne, unable to resist as the machine slaughtered in his name. He woke with blood on his tongue, heart pounding, the echo of warp laughter still ringing in his ears. The forge world outside remained deaf to such omens, but Stark knew better. The warp was circling, waiting for him to finish what he had begun. One evening as he sketched his Titan's reactor core upon the cell's wall, Cyrex spoke words that chilled him. "They will not let you finish. The Inquisitor sharpens her knives. The Magos weighs whether to brand you heretic or prophet. Even I do not know which way the forges will turn." Stark set down the fragment of metal he used as a stylus. His gaze hardened. "Then I'll finish before they decide." He stared at the glowing lines etched into the stone, the dream of a Titan taking form in forbidden places. He could feel the weight of destiny pressing down on him, heavier than the chains on his wrists. Somewhere in the endless void, the warp whispered again, louder than before, "Build it, and it will be ours." Mars had always been a world of unity, at least in appearance. The Mechanicus worshipped the Omnissiah with unbroken chants, their legions of priests moving as one mind, one creed, one faith. But faith was never truly united. It was layered with fear, pride, and the hunger for revelation. And now, with the arrival of Tony Stark, those layers began to crack. The whispers spread first in the Manufactoria, among the lesser priests who toiled in the shadow of Titans. They spoke of the Outlander who questioned sacred litanies, who dared suggest efficiency without ritual, who drew lines of impossible machines in the dust of his cell. Some whispered that he was the Omnissiah in mortal guise, descended to awaken Mars from its sleep. Others hissed that he was a false prophet, a heretic sent to lure them into damnation. In the high chambers of the Magi, arguments turned bitter. "He is knowledge incarnate," one tech priest intoned, its vox crackling with fervor. "The Omnissiah has delivered him to us. To ignore him is to spit upon the machine god's gift." Another hissed, servo skulls whirring at its side. "He is a man of iron reborn. Have you forgotten the archives? The ancients forged such things, and they turned upon their masters. To trust him is to invite annihilation." Static screeches filled the air as factions formed within the forged cities. A red schism began to bleed across Mars. Tony felt the tension even within his chamber. The guards who escorted him no longer spoke in one voice. Some regarded him with fear, clutching their weapons tighter, whispering prayers as though his mere presence was corrupting. Others looked at him with awe, as though they expected him to speak miracles. He saw the difference in their eyes, and he understood. He had been here before, in boardrooms, in governments, in wars. Division was both a danger and an opportunity. One night Cyrex entered with a tremor in its voice. "The forge is changing. Priests argue openly in the halls. Some call you prophet, others demand your execution. Soon blood will follow." Tony rubbed the iron chains that bound his wrists, his voice steady. "It was always going to come to this. You can't drop a new idea into a system this rigid without breaking it apart. The question is, what side will you stand on when it snaps?" Cyrex said nothing, but its silence spoke volumes. The first act of violence came within a week. A conclave of priests gathered in one of the grand assembly halls to debate Stark's fate. Prayers rose like thunder, but soon turned into accusations. One priest accused another of blasphemy for defending the Outlander. Another denounced the Inquisition's interference as a violation of Martian sovereignty. Binary canticles became screams of static. Then mechadendrites snapped like whips, and the first rivulets of blood spilled across the sacred floor. The schism had begun. From his chamber, Stark heard the alarms. Forge horns wailed across the city, summoning legions of Skitarii to restore order. He rose to the barred window, watching as the streets below burned with torchlight and plasma fire. Priests clashed in ritual combat, their servo-constructs turning upon one another, the smoke rising in black columns that smeared the red sky. The Magos came to him then, its towering frame quivering with static. "This is your doing," it thundered, lenses glowing hot. "You have poisoned Mars with your words." Tony met its rage with cold defiance. "No, I didn't poison it. I just held up a mirror. What you're seeing was already there. Fear, doubt, you built your empire on it. I just refused to play along." The Magos' voice cracked with fury. "You will be silenced before you shatter all." Yet before it could act, another priest stormed into the chamber, robes scorched, mechadendrites dripping oil. It pointed at Stark with trembling hands. "No, he is the key. Do you not see? The Omnissiah tests us through him. He brings the design that will elevate us beyond ritual. To destroy him is to destroy the gift of Mars itself." The two priests clashed, their servo arms slamming against each other with metallic shrieks. Sparks rained as they fought, their binary prayers warring like dueling hymns. Stark stood, still chained, watching the chaos unfold before him. His mind was a storm. He had wanted to build, to innovate, to save lives. Instead, he had ignited civil war on the most sacred forge world in the Imperium. The Inquisitor arrived shortly after, her mask untouched by the smoke of conflict. She looked upon the strife with a cold satisfaction. "This is why the Imperium endures," she said softly, her words cutting through the noise. "Because every innovation births heresy, and every heresy births blood. Do you see now, Outlander, the weight of your defiance?" But Stark did not bow his head. He raised his eyes to her, chains clinking, his voice steady as steel. "No, what I see is proof that this world is starving for change. You can call it heresy if you want, but people are willing to bleed for it, and that means it matters." The Inquisitor's silence was more terrible than her words. She turned and left, leaving only the echo of her footsteps. Outside, Mars burned. The schism had begun in earnest, and the name Tony Stark was carried on binary tongues as both curse and prophecy. And in the shadows of the warp, something vast and patient whispered with delight. The assembly lines of Mars had always been sanctuaries of order. For 10,000 years they thundered without pause, their endless rhythm powered by prayer as much as by machinery. Servo arms lifted plates of steel, sparks rained in mechanical showers, and workers toiled in silence broken only by litanies of maintenance. Titans were not built in days or years, they were raised like gods in centuries of labor. To disrupt such order was unthinkable, but order was already gone. The schism had reached the forges. Priests shouted binary curses at one another across the manufactoria, their mechadendrites writhing like serpents. Skitarii patrols broke into firefights amid the scaffolds. Even the machine spirits groaned in agitation, their once steady rhythms faltering into strange, discordant tones. And in the heart of it all, Tony Stark worked, chained to an assembly platform, drawing forbidden designs into reality. He was allowed to touch tools now, not freely, but under constant guard. The Magos had permitted him limited access, not from trust but from necessity. Too many priests had begun to demand proof of his genius. Too many whispered that if he were indeed the vessel of the Omnissiah, his works would reveal it. The first frames of the Titan had begun to take shape under his direction. They were crude skeletons of adamantium, scavenged from incomplete projects, but Stark's influence was unmistakable. Lines were smoother, joints lighter, systems streamlined. It was a Titan unlike any the Forge world had seen in millennia, and for that it was hated. Sabotage struck first. A plasma conduit ruptured above the scaffold, spewing white fire. Stark rolled aside, chains dragging him down, as molten energy cascaded across the platform. One of the priests screamed as his robes ignited, the scent of burning flesh rising above the smoke. When the flames died, Stark stared at the remains and muttered through clenched teeth, "Someone wants this dead before it's even born." Later that night, as he studied fractured schematics by the light of a single lumen, the attempt grew bolder. A figure cloaked in crimson robes entered his chamber, steps silent, vox-masked face hidden. At first he thought it was Cyrex, then the knife slid free. The assassin moved fast, but Stark moved faster. The chains clattered as he swung the broken fragment of a servo plate into the attacker's arm, knocking the blade aside. They grappled in the dim light, metal clashing against metal, prayers of death whispered into his ear. Stark slammed the attacker's head into the wall, tearing the mask loose. The priest's eyes burned with fanaticism. "You will not damn us with your false light," the assassin hissed. "Better one heretic dead than a world consumed." The words cut sharper than the blade. This wasn't just one fanatic, this was doctrine made flesh. The fight ended when Cyrex arrived, mechadendrites snapping the assassin's spine with mechanical precision. The corpse collapsed in a pool of oil and blood. Stark sat against the wall, chest heaving, his wrists raw from the chains. "They'll keep coming," he said hoarsely. Cyrex's lenses flickered. "Yes, the forge bleeds. The Inquisitor sharpens her judgment. If you continue, you will not survive." Stark wiped blood from his mouth. "Then I don't stop. Because if I stop, then this was all for nothing. Every man who's died, every drop of blood spilled, it has to mean something." The next day the assembly line was not the same. Blood stained the scaffold floors. Workers chanted prayers of protection while staring at Stark with a mix of awe and terror. He gave them no sermons, no promises, only instructions. Build faster, assemble with precision, cut away the excess. Piece by piece the Titan grew, but every new plate of armor, every reactor coil, every weapon mount became another target. Twice more sabotage struck, once a fuel line corrupted with rot bacteria, once a machine spirit driven mad by corrupted rites. Each time Stark fought against the sabotage with ingenuity, patching what should not have been possible, improvising where faith demanded failure. And each time, more priests whispered that perhaps he truly was chosen. Still, the blood toll mounted. Guards fell in ambushes, workers burned alive when reactors flared. The Titan's birth was baptized not only in incense and prayer but in corpses. One evening when silence finally descended, Stark stood at the base of the half-formed colossus. Its skeletal frame loomed above him, vast enough to blot out the forge lights. He touched the cold metal, his voice low. "You'd better be worth it," he muttered, "because people are dying just to give you a chance to stand." For a moment he thought he heard something stir within the frame. Not the creak of steel, not the hum of machines, but a whisper. Low, hungry, promising power. His hand froze. "No," he said aloud, stepping back. "Not you, not like that." But the warp was listening. It always listened. The Inquisitor came that night, her mask gleaming in the shadows. She studied the half-born Titan, its bones rising like the skeleton of a god. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the silence like a blade. "This is heresy given form, and it will drown Mars in blood." Stark met her gaze, unflinching. "Then you'd better decide, Inquisitor. Do you want to stop it, or do you want to survive what's coming?" Her silence was worse than any answer. She turned and left without a word. Stark remained, staring at the Titan's looming frame, his chest tight with exhaustion and fury. The forge smelled of smoke, blood, and hot oil. He knew now that every step forward would only bring more blood, more betrayal, more danger, and yet he also knew this. The Titan was no longer just his dream. It had become a symbol, a spark of change in a world smothered by faith. Blood had christened the assembly line. There was no turning back. The Titan stood half-born upon the assembly platform, its skeletal frame towering above the forge halls like the carcass of some slumbering god. It was not yet alive, not yet sanctified, but it drew attention nonetheless. Not just from priests and workers, not just from the eyes of the Inquisition, but from something far darker. The warp had noticed. It began with whispers. At first Stark thought they were his own thoughts, moments of exhaustion, stress unraveling the edges of reason, a voice urging him to cut corners here, to increase output there, a suggestion to fuse systems in ways he hadn't considered, ideas so sharp and elegant they almost seduced him. He would wake at night with schematics drawn into the dust at his side, though he could not remember sketching them. Cyrex noticed the change as well. "Your hands move faster," the priest said one evening, lenses fixed on the half-built reactor core. "Your designs sharpen as though guided by an unseen algorithm. But their symmetry is wrong, too perfect, too deliberate." Tony frowned, his fingers trembling slightly as he set aside a fragment of alloy. "You think I'm being helped?" Cyrex's voice lowered to static. "Not helped, hunted." The signs multiplied. Workers began to collapse on the assembly floor, their eyes rolling white as though possessed. Some woke screaming fragments of binary that spoke of endless eyes watching through the veil. Others did not wake at all, their bodies drained of heat, skin pale as ash, servo skulls short-circuited without cause, their picked feeds replaying images of writhing shapes where none had stood, and always, the Titan seemed to hum in resonance with the chaos. Stark tried to fight it, grounding himself in reason, focusing on the physics of each piece, the calculations of weight and power, but even his equations twisted, the numbers rewriting themselves into patterns that made no sense yet glowed with a strange haunting logic, circles upon circles, fractals without end. One night as he slept against the cold wall of his sanctum, he dreamed not of machines, but of a battlefield drenched in blood. His Titan strode across it, fully formed, its weapons screaming with impossible fire, but its banners no longer bore the Aquila. They writhed with symbols of madness, 8-pointed stars, serpentine sigils, eyes that blinked and bled. Inside the dream, he stood in the cockpit, but he was not alone. Shadows crowded around him, whispering, stroking his armor with invisible fingers. Builder, innovator, savior, give us your design, and we will give you eternity. Make it ours, and your Titan will never fall. He awoke gasping, drenched in sweat, his heart hammering like a reactor core. The forge lights still burned, the Titan's half-formed frame looming over him like a sentinel. He muttered aloud, his voice hoarse, "Not yours, never yours," but he was not sure who he was trying to convince. The priests, too, felt the change. Some grew terrified, refusing to enter the assembly halls at all. Others grew fevered, proclaiming that the Omnissiah was revealing his true face through the Outlander. They fought one another in the streets of the Forge City, their binary hymns clashing into shrieks of static as Skitarii fired upon their own kin. The schism widened with every day. The Titan grew taller. The Inquisitor came again. She stood before the looming frame, the shadows of its vast skeleton draping her like wings, her masked gaze turned upon Stark, her voice as cold as the void. "The warp stirs around you, Outlander. Do you not feel it? Every prayer of the priests, every drop of blood spilled in this schism, every whisper of your designs, they feed the Immerse. You are building not a weapon but a beacon, and daemons will answer." Tony met her stare, exhaustion carved into his features. "Then maybe you should stop threatening me and start helping me. Because if this thing becomes a beacon, the only way to fight what comes through is with firepower. You've seen what I can do, you've seen what this can be." Her silence stretched, then finally she spoke. "If you falter, if even for a moment your design bends toward corruption, I will burn you alive within the shell you've built. Do you understand?" He gave a bitter half-smile. Wouldn't be the first time someone's tried. After she left, Stark returned to the Titan's frame. He pressed his palm against the cold metal, whispering under his breath as if the machine itself could hear. "You're mine, not theirs, not the warp's, mine. You'll fight for humanity, not feed on it. I'll make damn sure of that." But as his hand lingered, the metal pulsed faintly beneath his touch, like a heartbeat. He pulled back sharply, staring at his palm. The Titan was not alive, not yet, but something was stirring within its machine spirit, something not entirely of his design. The next day, when the workers returned to the assembly line, they found the floor smeared with blood. Dozens of servitors had torn themselves apart during the night, their augmetics twisted into grotesque shapes, their skulls cracked open as though something had tried to crawl out. Stark looked upon the carnage with a grim, unflinching expression. The warp was circling, waiting to devour his creation, but he also knew this. Every whisper, every nightmare, every death only proved that what he was building mattered. If daemons feared it, if the warp desired it, then it had the power to change everything, and that made it worth every drop of blood. The alarms of Mars were not meant for training drills or ritual displays. They were meant for war, and when they howled across the red planet, every forge bell and voxhorn screamed with them. The orcs had come. A green-skin fleet, drawn by the schism's chaos and the promise of spoils, had descended on the forge world with brutal hunger. Their ships burned through the void like crude meteors, slamming into the outskirts of Mars's manufactoria in waves. The sky blackened with smoke as orc warbands poured across the sands, bellowing their war cries, crude engines coughing fire. The Mechanicus mobilized with ferocity. Legions of Skitarii marched from their barracks, weapons glowing with plasma fire. Titans, long slumbering, awoke with groaning hymns, their machine spirits stirred into wrath by the priests' desperate chants. And in the heart of the greatest forge, chained no longer, stood Tony Stark, watching as his half-born Titan was prepared for its first walk. The Magos loomed above him, its vox crackling with cold judgment. "This is your trial, Outlander. If your design fails, it dies with you. If it succeeds, it belongs to the Imperium." Tony gave a wry half-smile, though fatigue shadowed his face. "Guess it's showtime." the scaffolds withdrew, the colossal machine stirred. Stark climbed into the cockpit, a throne of cables and augmetic thrones fused with circuitry. The machine spirit hummed in restless unease, as though testing its master. For a moment he felt the whispers again, chaotic, hungry, offering him victory if he surrendered his design. He gritted his teeth and shoved them aside. "Not today," he muttered, fingers tightening on the controls. "This one's mine." The Titan rose. Its first steps shook the forge floor, scattering ash and dust in thunderous clouds. Sparks rained as its reactor roared to life, brighter and cleaner than the Imperium had ever known. Its frame gleamed, sleeker and more balanced than its ancient kin. Weapon systems powered, capacitors humming like storms. Outside, the Orcs stormed across the Martian wastes, a horde of scrap tanks and warbikes, their crude banners snapping in the wind, their laughter booming across the battlefield. The air smelled of oil, smoke and blood. Stark's Titan stepped into the open, towering above the Manufactoria gates. The priests gasped, some falling to their knees in awe, others crying heresy even as they blessed its frame with frantic prayers. Skitari formations cleared a path, Vox channels alive with disbelief. The Orcs saw it and roared in delight. "A big un, da Humies got a big un." Then the battle began. The Orcs charged with their usual ferocity, a wall of green flesh and crude metal. Cannons boomed, rockets streaked skyward, warbikes screamed across the sands. Stark's Titan moved like no other. Where Imperial god engines were lumbering juggernauts, his design was nimble, reactive. Servos adjusted in fractions of seconds, stabilizers absorbing recoil with fluid grace. Its plasma annihilator swung across the field, unleashing a sun-bright beam that incinerated an entire Orc warband in a single blast. Their bodies evaporated into ash, their machines melted into slag. The Mechanicus watched in awe. Even the Magos faltered. The Orcs responded with glee, surging harder. Gargant's greenskin mockeries of Titans lurched forward, belching smoke and fire. Their crude cannons spat shells that cratered the earth around Stark's machine. One shot struck the Titan's shoulder, tearing armor away in molten sprays. The cockpit rattled, warnings flashing. "Yeah, I felt that," Stark growled, adjusting systems on the fly. His armor's HUD interfaced with the Titan's systems as if the machine had always been meant for him. He rerouted power, stabilized the reactor, and swung the massive energy blade attached to the Titan's arm. The blade ignited, humming with a burning field of plasma. With a single sweep, it cleaved a Gargant in two, its hulking form collapsing in fire and green ichor. The ground shook with the impact. Still, the Orcs did not falter. They never did. They swarmed, climbing the Titan's legs, hacking at armor plates with crude claws and saws. Stark snarled, activating shock discharge systems that fried dozens of them to cinders. The smell of burnt flesh and ozone filled the air. Inside the forge, the priests screamed prayers to the Omnissiah, torn between horror and devotion. Some declared Stark a prophet, others cried that he was the herald of the Dark Mechanicum. The Inquisitor watched in silence, her masked face unreadable, but her hand lingered on the hilt of her blade. The Titan fought on. Every motion was a gamble, every strike a test of design. The warp whispered in the back of Stark's mind, promising more, greater power, invincibility. If only he surrendered the machine's spirit to them. He gritted his teeth and spat into the void. "No deals, not with you." With a final strike, Stark's Titan unleashed a storm from its shoulder-mounted rail cannon, a blast of energy so precise it tore through the Orc warlord's battle tank and ignited its ammunition stores. The explosion rippled across the battlefield, sending the greenskins into chaos. Their charge faltered, their laughter died. When the smoke cleared, the Titan stood tall, scarred but unbroken, its reactor humming like a heartbeat. The field around it was a wasteland of corpses and burning wreckage. For a moment, silence reigned. Then the priests screamed in binary hymns, some in exultation, others in terror. Tony Stark exhaled slowly, sweat dripping down his face inside the cockpit. "Trial by fire," he muttered. "Looks like we passed." But outside, the Inquisitor whispered to herself, so low no one else could hear. "Or perhaps, you've only begun to fail." The battlefield still smoldered when the chains returned. Tony Stark stood in the shadow of his Titan, its frame scarred but triumphant, steam rising from molten joints, reactor glow still pulsing like the heartbeat of a god. Around it, the Manufactoria lay in ruin, Orc wreckage littering the red sands. The Skitari chanted victory hymns, the priests muttered prayers of awe, and whispers spread like wildfire across the forge. The Outlander's design had triumphed where even ancient Titans might have faltered, yet victory in the Imperium was never without suspicion. The Inquisitor arrived with her retinue of black-armored agents, faces blank, bolters raised. She walked with the silence of judgment, her mask reflecting the Titan's glow. The Magos bowed deeply, but Stark noticed the tremor in its servo arms. Everyone knew what came next. "Inquisitor Vera," the Magos rasped, "you have seen with your own optics. The design functions, the weapon holds. It is a miracle." Vera's voice was cold steel. "No, it is heresy proven dangerous." The words silenced even the machine hymns. Stark stepped down from the Titan's access ramp, his armor scorched, his face lined with exhaustion, yet he still carried himself with defiance, meeting the Inquisitor's masked gaze as if they stood alone. "You saw what happened," he said. "You saw what it did. That machine turned the tide. Without it, the orcs would have burned half this forge to the ground." Her voice cut like a blade, and because of it Mars trembles with rebellion. Priests turn upon priests, blood spills in the temples, the warp itself stirs with hunger. Do you think that victory absolves you, Outlander? No, it condemns you further. Stark's jaw tightened. You don't want victory, you want obedience. That's the problem, isn't it? You'd rather drown in blood than admit your system is broken. Gasps and binary curses filled the air. Skitarii raised rifles in reflex. The Magos recoiled, as though even standing near Stark's defiance might mark it for execution. Vera advanced, her voice growing colder with every word. "You mistake this galaxy for your own. Here obedience is survival. And you, Tony Stark, man of iron, false prophet, you are a spark that will ignite rebellion wherever you tread. I cannot allow that." She raised her hand. Chains of sanctified steel clattered forward, carried by her acolytes. "You are under arrest for techno-heresy. You will be tried, judged and burned." For a moment Stark considered fighting. The Titan loomed above, its systems still awake, its machine spirit thrumming in restless energy. He could climb back into the cockpit, unleash fire, and scatter them all like dust, but the thought twisted his stomach. He had built the Titan to save, not to slaughter the very people who might one day rely on it. So he stood still, letting the chains clasp around his wrists once more. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly. Vera tilted her head. "No, I am preventing one." He was dragged through the forge halls, past workers who knelt and whispered his name as both curse and prayer. Prophet, heretic, savior, doom. Their eyes followed him like shadows, wide with fear and hope in equal measure. He realized then that his dream had already escaped him. Whether or not he lived, whether or not the Titan survived, the idea was alive in their minds, and ideas were harder to kill than men. They brought him to a sanctified chamber deep beneath the forge, a place where walls wept oil and incense burned in choking waves. The Inquisitor's throne was set there, surrounded by purity seals and skull reliquaries. He was forced to his knees before her. "Speak your last words, Outlander," she said, "before your blasphemy is silenced." Tony lifted his head, meeting her gaze without fear. "You can kill me, you can burn the Titan, but you can't kill the truth. You saw what it could do. They all did, and now they'll never forget. You think you rule through fear, but fear cracks the moment someone shows a better way. That's what I built, a glimpse of something better, and no fire can burn that away." The chamber fell silent. Even the Magos hesitated, servo arms twitching as though torn between faith and reason. The words struck deep, not just into ears but into the foundations of belief. Vera leaned forward, her masked face inches from his. "Then I will erase not just your body but your memory. You will be forgotten, Stark. Your name will vanish from every record. Your Titan will be claimed, sanctified, made into a weapon of obedience. No one will know you ever existed." For the first time Stark faltered. To die was one thing. To be erased, to be reduced to nothing, that was worse. Yet even then he forced a bitter smile. "You can erase my name, but you'll never erase the fire you've lit, because you can't control inspiration. You can only try to bury it, and eventually it digs itself back out." Her silence was heavier than chains. Finally she gestured to her retinue. "Take him to the pyres." They dragged him away, through tunnels that stank of ash and blood. He heard the distant roar of the forge, the endless hymns of the priests, the groaning of Titans in their cradles. He knew he was walking toward death, but somewhere above, in the half-born frame of his Titan, a pulse of light flickered in the reactor core. The machine spirit stirred. The pyres of Mars burned without ceasing. They were fed with heretics, mutants and machines judged too impure to serve. Stark was led toward them in silence, chains dragging across the iron floor, guards flanking him with bolters primed. The acrid air stung his lungs, thick with smoke and the coppery tang of blood. Chanting priests lined the path, their voices a monotonous hum. Cleanse the unclean, burn the heretic, preserve the Omnissiah's will. At the center of the forge yard stood the scaffold of execution, blackened from centuries of fire. Above it, purity seals fluttered like tattered wings. The crowd that gathered was vast, priests, workers, Skitarii, drawn by equal parts devotion and curiosity. They had heard of the man of iron, now they would watch him burn. But not all eyes held condemnation. In the crowd Stark glimpsed faces that looked at him with fear, yes, but also with quiet hope. Workers who had seen his titan rise against the orcs, guards who had whispered his name in reverence, priests who had faltered in their hymns, shaken by his questions. Seeds of doubt had been planted, and they were not easily killed. As the guards forced him onto the scaffold, the Inquisitor appeared. Vera's masked visage reflected the firelight, her voice echoing across the yard. People of Mars, behold the price of heresy. This man fallen from the void has spoken against the Omnissiah, has polluted our rights, has built in arrogance without sanction. His words divide us, his works invite corruption. For this he shall be purged. The crowd murmured, some shouting assent, others whispering in unease. The guards prepared the ignition systems, the chains tightened. Then a voice rang out, "Stop." The crowd shifted as a figure forced its way forward. Cyrex 44 stood there, robes torn, lenses glowing with frantic light. Its mechadendrites writhed, holding aloft a data slate. "You cannot burn him. His work is not heresy, it is salvation. Look." The slate projected schematics into the air, images of the half-born Titan, reactor systems perfected, weapon calibrations beyond anything Mars had seen in centuries. Gasps rippled through the priests. Even the Magos recoiled, lenses zooming to confirm the impossible. "This," Cyrex shouted, "is no corruption. This is evolution. The Omnissiah sent him to us not as curse but as gift." Chaos erupted. Some priests cried out in fury, calling Cyrex corrupted. Others argued, desperate to see the designs, to claim them, to understand. The crowd fractured, arguments breaking into violence. Skitarii raised weapons against one another. The forge yard became a battlefield in moments. In the chaos, Stark felt his chains loosen. A hand, flesh, not augmetic, gripped his wrist. He turned and saw one of the guards, eyes burning with conviction. "Go," the guard whispered. "You saved us from the orcs. I won't let them waste you here." The chains fell. Stark stumbled, but another figure was already waiting, an underserf, gaunt but determined. Then another, and another. Workers, guards, even a low-ranking priest, all had come together, a secret faction born of whispered belief. They surrounded him, shielding him from the worst of the melee. "Why?" Stark demanded, even as they dragged him from the scaffold. "Because you gave us something this world has not known in 1,000 years, the guard answered. "Choice, we will not let it die." They moved through smoke and blood, slipping into maintenance tunnels beneath the forge. Bolter fire thundered above, the Inquisitor's voice echoing commands of extermination. Her assassin shadowed the crowd, blades flashing, but the loyalists met it with desperate sacrifice, one by one falling to buy Stark another step. At last, they reached the dim sanctum where the half-built Titan waited, its skeletal frame looming like a silent witness. Stark collapsed against its leg, breathing hard, blood smeared across his face. Cyrex joined him, robes scorched, hands trembling with static. "They will hunt us," the priest said. "The Inquisition, the Magos, all of Mars, you cannot escape them." "Then we don't run," Stark rasped. "We finish it." The words silenced the chamber. The works exchanged uneasy looks, torn between awe and dread. The Titan's frame loomed above them, its heart incomplete, its weapons dormant. To finish it would mean open rebellion, to stop would mean certain death. Cyrex's lenses glowed faintly. "If we build this machine, we break with everything we are. We will be outcasts, apostates, hunted until the last of us is ash." Stark pushed himself to his feet, chains still dangling from his wrists. He stared at the Titan, his voice steady. "Then let them hunt us. But if we finish this, if we make it walk, we give humanity a chance. Not just obedience, not just fear, a chance." The silence stretched, heavy with destiny. Then, slowly the guard who had freed him knelt. One by one the others followed. Even Cyrex lowered its mechadendrites in assent. The pact of iron was made, not with signatures, not with oaths but with blood and defiance. They would build the Titan together, in secret and in rebellion, knowing full well it would cost their lives. Above them the forge world burned with civil war. Priests killed priests, Skitarii slaughtered their own kin, the Inquisition's hand spread like fire. The warp laughed, delighting in the chaos. and in the shadows of the assembly hall, the Titan's machine spirit stirred more violently, its hum deepening into something almost like a growl. It was waiting. The red skies of Mars became black with smoke. Lightning tore across the heavens, not of storm but of warp-born rifts. From them poured voices that clawed at the soul, whispers of promises, screams of hunger. The civil war of the Mechanicus had drawn predators, and now the predators came. The traitor legions descended. Chaos ships breached orbit, their twisted hulls bristling with corruption, spilling forth drop pods like burning meteors. On the surface, cults that had lurked in shadow for centuries rose in sudden fury, daubing the eight-pointed star across the walls of Manufactoria, chanting in madness as they slaughtered priests and workers alike. The siege of Mars had begun. Tony Stark stood at the foot of his Titan, still incomplete yet already feared, as the Forge City shook under bombardment. Explosions rippled across the horizon, Skitarii legions clashing with cultists in streets slick with oil and blood. Titans long entombed in silence awoke to war, their thunderous steps shaking the world as they fired into the enemy ranks. But even as Imperial might answered, the infection was already inside the forge. Chaos had infiltrated their hearts. Outlander, Cyrex rasped, static lacing its voice. The cults gather near. They know what we build. They come for it. For you. Stark's jaw clenched. Then we make sure they don't take it. Around him, the pact he had forged. The workers, the guards, the broken priests assembled in defiance. They were few, barely armed, their faces drawn with exhaustion and fear, yet their eyes burned with something more dangerous than faith, determination. The first wave struck at dawn. Cultists surged through the Manufactoria, their bodies warped by mutations, their eyes alight with madness. They carried crude blades, stolen lasguns, and the blessings of the warp. The defenders met them in the assembly halls, lasfire sparking across steel walls, blood pooling in the gutters. Stark fought among them, stripped of his Iron Man armor, wielding only scavenged weapons. Every strike was desperate, every breath stolen from death. The Titan loomed above, silent, skeletal, its machine spirit growling faintly with hunger. The cultists screamed its name in corrupted hymns. Give us the God Machine, it is ours, it is promised. Their fury was endless. For every cultist slain, two more pressed forward. The defenders fell in heaps, torn apart by blades and claws. Stark stumbled over corpses as he fired a stolen plasma pistol, the weapon burning his hand raw. He fought like a man possessed, though inside his chest a hollow dread grew. Cyrex, he shouted over the roar. The Titan, can it walk? Not yet. The priest howled, sparks leaping from its augmetics. The core is incomplete, the weapon systems unbound. To rouse it now would destroy us. Then we buy time, Stark snarled. And so they did. For hours, the defenders bled the halls red. Guardsmen died screaming as mutated giants tore through their ranks. Workers broke their hands swinging crude hammers into armored foes. Cyrex himself burned with fury, his mechadendrites ripping cultists limb from limb, even as ichor dripped from his damaged frame. Yet still the enemy came. By nightfall, the Manufactoria was a fortress under siege. The walls shook with bombardment. The ceilings rained dust, the endless chants of cultists echoing like drums of doom. From the warp fires outside, greater shadows stirred, demons forcing their way into reality, their howls rattling the soul. Inside the chamber, Stark collapsed against the Titan's leg, his chest heaving, his hands slick with blood. His people were dying, the pact he had forged was crumbling, and the Inquisition was nowhere to be seen. This is it, he muttered, more to himself than to anyone. This is how it ends. Then the Titan stirred. Its machine spirit howled, a deep resonant roar that rattled the forge to its bones. Sparks cascaded down its frame, lights ignited across its reactor lines, bathing the hall in white fire. The skeletal machine that had loomed incomplete now trembled with life, its will reaching out like a storm. The defenders froze, the cultists fell to their knees, screaming praises to the dark gods. Cyrex stumbled forward, lenses wide. It wakes too soon, it is not ready, but it chooses. Stark pushed himself to his feet, eyes locked on the towering colossus. For a heartbeat he felt it in his mind, the Titan's spirit, vast and ancient, hungry and uncertain. It did not speak in words but in intent. It demanded purpose, and Stark gave it one. You don't belong to them, he whispered fiercely. You don't belong to the warp. You don't belong to their chains. You're mine, and together we fight. The Titan answered with a thunderous step. Its incomplete weapons still roared with power, reactor lines blazing as it tore through the Manufactoria gates. The ground split beneath its feet as it strode into the battlefield, its skeletal frame wreathed in fire and smoke. The cultists screamed in ecstasy as daemons clawed their way from the warp, but the Titan met them head-on. its reactor beam vaporizing horrors in bursts of sun-bright light, its limbs crushing warbands beneath tons of steel. Each strike shook Mars itself. The defenders rallied behind it, their despair turning to fury. For the first time they believed not in prayers but in defiance. Yet even as the Titan fought, Stark felt the danger. The warp was not retreating, it was feeding. The more the Titan killed, the louder the whispers became. Yes, yes, spill more blood, make it ours. He clenched his fists, fighting to silence them, knowing the true battle was only beginning. The siege of Mars had begun with fire and blood, but the war for the Titan's soul had only just started. The Forge world burned. Entire districts lay shattered beneath the boots of warring Titans, their ruins echoing with hymns of defiance and screams of madness. Warp lightning split the crimson sky, casting shadows that writhed with demonic forms. Skitarii legions fought in ordered ranks against tides of chaos cultists and traitor guardsmen, their volleys of fire swallowed by the endless horde. Above it all, the roar of daemons howled across the veil, hungering for Mars itself. And then the new Titan rose. It had been born incomplete, its armor still skeletal in places, its weapons not fully sanctified by ritual, but it no longer waited. Reactor lines blazed with Stark's designs, humming with power so clean and fierce it outshone the forge fires themselves. Its steps thundered as it strode from the manufactoria, each movement a defiance of tradition, each tremor shaking the faith of all who saw. The defenders fell silent. Even the cultists paused, their chants breaking into gasps. A Titan unlike any they had seen stood before them, sleek, sharp, a fusion of Martian might and Stark's vision. Its eyes burned white-blue, its reactor heart beating like a second sun. Tony Stark sat in the cockpit, his body fused to the throne by a web of cables and neural links. The machine spirit surged around him, vast and furious, trying to pull him apart, but he clung to it, bending it, forcing it into harmony with his will. The whispers of the warp clawed at the edges of his mind, promising him dominion, urging him to let go. Yield, they hissed. We will make you a god. Let the Titan be ours, and you will stride eternal. No, Stark growled through gritted teeth. This isn't yours, not now, not ever. He drove the machine forward. The Titan's plasma annihilator lit the sky with fire, incinerating an entire phalanx of corrupted Skitarii in one blast. Its rail cannon shrieked, punching through a traitor baneblade and reducing it to a crater of molten slag. A swing of its plasma-edged blade carved through a daemonic engine, its echo sizzling into smoke as it was cut in half. Every movement was faster, sharper than the ancient god engines beside it. Where their lumbering steps crushed the earth with ritualized precision, Stark's Titan danced, turning, striking, adapting. It fought like he had always fought, inventive, relentless, unbound. The Mechanicus watched in shock. Some fell to their knees in awe, declaring it the Omnissiah reborn. Others screamed in terror, calling it a mockery that must be destroyed. The Inquisitor, watching from her vantage point, stood utterly still, her masked face unreadable. The daemons answered the challenge. From the warp tiers in the sky, greater horrors descended, towering forms of fire and shadow, their eyes pits of hunger. A bloodthirster roared, its wings blotting the stars as it charged, whip and axe in hand. The ground cracked under its steps as it bellowed for the Titan's soul. Stark braced. All right, big guy, let's see who's hungrier. The daemon struck, its axe crashing against the Titan's blade. Sparks like suns flared, the shockwave toppling nearby structures. The two giants locked in combat, their roars shaking Mars itself. The bloodthirster lashed its whip, tearing armor from the Titan's flank. Stark rerouted power, grinding his teeth as the pain echoed through the neural link like fire in his veins. Not today, he snarled. With a surge of power, the Titan's blade flared white-hot and cleaved through the daemon's chest. Warp ichor sprayed in fountains, its scream splitting the air as it dissolved back into nothingness. But victory brought no relief. More daemons poured from the sky, legions of them, clawing, shrieking, their forms writhing with hate. The Titan fought, cutting swathes through them with plasma and fire, every strike tearing apart monstrosities that would have overwhelmed entire regiments. Yet with each kill, the whispers grew louder. Yes, more, blood for us, let us in. Open the gates and you will never fall. Stark clutched the controls, sweat pouring down his face, his mind shaking beneath the weight of their voices. The Titan wanted to answer them, its spirit howled with rage, straining to embrace the warp's gifts. Stark forced it back, his will iron, but he could feel his grip slipping. Below, the defenders rallied behind the Titan's fury. Guardsmen charged once more, priests screamed binary hymns, Skitarii fought with redoubled resolve. For the first time in memory, they saw hope in a forge world aflame. Yet hope was fragile. With every moment Stark held the Titan steady, it cost him a piece of himself. The neural link burned his nerves raw, his heart thundered as though it would burst, and the machine spirit roared like a beast straining against its leash. Inquisitor Vera turned to her assassin, her voice a whisper. If he falters, strike him down. Better the Titan die than be taken. Still Stark fought. Still the Titan walked. He unleashed its final weapon, a reactor surge that burst outward in a storm of energy, vaporizing demonic hordes in a ring of white fire. The ground itself turned to glass. The diamonds shrieked and fled, retreating into the warp-torn sky. For a brief, impossible moment, silence fell. The Titan stood alone amid the ruins, reactor heart pulsing, its blade dripping with the essence of God slain. Inside the cockpit, Tony Stark slumped, blood dripping from his nose, his eyes burning with exhaustion. His voice cracked into the silence, still standing. But deep within the Titan's core, the whispers remained, stronger now, their laughter echoing. Soon, so soon. And Stark knew, the true battle was not on Mars, but within the soul of the god machine he had built. The silence after battle was never truly silent. The ruins of Mars echoed with distant screams, with the groaning of collapsing manufactoria, with the faint crackle of fires that would never be extinguished. The Titan stood among the wreckage, its frame scorched, its reactor burning with unnatural light. Inside the cockpit, Tony Stark could feel the machine spirit trembling, restless, hungry. He had driven it beyond its limits, and in doing so he had awakened something vast, something ancient, something that wanted to claim him. The warp whispers pressed harder than ever, coiling around his thoughts like chains. Yield. We will make you eternal. You and the Titan shall be one, a god among men. He pressed his bloodied hand to the control throne, forcing his will against theirs. I didn't build this for you. I built it for them. The laughter in his mind was endless. Below, the Forge world reeled in chaos. The schism had left Mars broken. Priests at war with priests. Skitarii legions splintered. The Inquisition's hand heavy upon the survivors. The Titan had saved the Forge from annihilation, but its very existence had torn faith apart. The Imperium would never allow it to remain untainted, not when the warp itself clawed for its soul. Inquisitor Veera stood at the foot of the Colossus, her mask reflecting the reactor glow. She spoke to her retinue, her voice cold as ever. If the Outlander falls, we end it. Destroy the Titan, burn its spirit, purge every record. But she hesitated. Even she could not deny what she had witnessed, a Titan that had fought like no other, a weapon that could change the Imperium's endless wars. The choice weighed heavy. Inside the cockpit, Stark knew the truth she could not voice. The Titan was too dangerous to live. If the warp claimed it, it would become a god machine of chaos, a nightmare capable of burning entire systems. But if it were destroyed, humanity would lose the only glimpse of progress it had seen in 10,000 years. And he, Tony Stark, was the fulcrum. His body was breaking. Blood seeped from his nose and ears. His vision swam with shadows. The neural link burned through his nerves like molten wire. Every breath a battle. But in the midst of that pain, clarity came. The Titan needed a soul strong enough to bind it, a spirit that would resist the warp forever. It needed his. All right, he whispered, a bitter smile twisting his lips. One last trick. He reached into the Titan's core, deeper than any priest had dared, pushing past the machine spirit's rage, past the warp's whispers, past his own fear. His arc reactor, the heart of his own design, the symbol of his survival, flared against his chest. He pressed it to the interface, fusing man and machine in a final act of defiance. The cockpit blazed with light. The Titan roared, a sound that shook Mars to its molten core, its frame lit with holy fire, its reactor surging brighter than the Forge suns. Daemons that lingered screamed and fled, their forms unraveling in terror. For a moment, the Titan was not a machine, not a weapon, but a beacon of pure defiance against the void. The priests fell to their knees, weeping. Some cried that the Omnissiah had manifested, others screamed heresy. The Inquisitor raised her blade but did not strike. Inside, Stark's body convulsed, torn apart by the power coursing through him. His heart faltered, his mind frayed. He felt the warp pressing one last time, its voices shrieking. You could have ruled. You could have been eternal. Through blood and fire, he whispered his answer. I didn't want to be eternal. I just wanted to matter. And with that he gave everything. His life, his soul, his spark. The Titan's machine spirit howled, but it was no longer hungry. It was bound, pure, locked into defiance forever. It would not bend to chaos. It would not be corrupted. It would serve, not as a god, but as a guardian. When the light faded, the Titan stood silent, reactor humming steady, its spirit calm for the first time. But inside the cockpit, there was no Tony Stark, only ash, only silence, only the faint echo of his will burned into the machine. The Inquisitor approached, her masked face unreadable. She gazed up at the Colossus, then turned to her acolytes. Erase him, she commanded softly. No record, no name. Let the Imperium believe this Titan was always ours. He will be forgotten. The priests obeyed, but not all hearts were willing. Among the workers, the guards, the broken priests who had forged the Pact of Iron, whispers remained.
whispers of the man who had fallen from the sky, who had built a titan not of faith but of vision, who had given his life to bind it against the dark. They whispered of the man of iron, and though his name was purged from the records of Mars, though the Imperium buried his existence in silence, his legacy could not be erased. Every time the titan strode into battle, its reactor heart glowing like a second sun, those who saw it felt a spark stir in their souls, a spark of defiance, a spark of innovation, a spark of Tony Stark, and in the endless night of the 41st millennium, even a spark was enough to light a fire.